All set.
Well, good afternoon. I'm sorry. Good morning here in Maui anyway. I want to welcome all of you who were able to join us last week. Anybody who missed last week's presentation, I hope you had a chance to catch up. This is our sixth and our last session in this series. As Sue mentioned at the end of last week's session, this week we're going to be having more discussion and less presentation. We hope all of you will share your thoughts and opinions as we explore the topic, where do we go from here? Please leave your microphones on mute until you're ready to share. And I'll turn it over to Sue.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you all for being part of this Racism in America series as we have explored the history of our country that we didn't learn in school. As we have seen during our time together, much of the racial turmoil in our country today can be traced directly to elements of this history even before the founding of the United States. Many of the racial stereotypes that we hear or hold ourselves are a direct consequence of intentional public and economic policy and cultural beliefs that have no grounding in genetics. Other countries with similarly sordid racial pasts have sought to move forward via a process called truth and reconciliation. America is in desperate need of such a process. So we have together embarked on a search for more truth. Much of it has been painful, especially for those of us who believe that we are good people who seek peace and justice. I hope this time together has been meaningful for you as it has been for me. Today, we will look ahead to use our deeper understanding of our country's history to shape our future actions as we indeed seek peace and justice for all. So we begin, as usual, with a brief recap of last week's class, voter suppression, then and now. We looked at the legal history of voting rights in America, beginning with the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution and its amendments, actions by the legislatures, both state and federal, and decisions by the Supreme Court that have been so pivotal in our history of voting rights. We discussed the 15th Amendment and the actions that occurred at the end of Reconstruction that were followed by 100 years of voter suppression tactics that led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then in 2013, the Supreme Court decision in the case Shelby County v. Holder, and the backlash that occurred with the passage of voter ID laws, voting roll purges, and limitations of resources. And now, following the 2020 election, the assault on voting rights is accelerating. In terms of this class series, we began in the early years, 1619 to 1865, and then looked at a time we called slavery by another name, marked by Reconstruction, the passage of Black codes that led to convict leasing, the Jim Crow era of segregation, all of this enforced by horrific violence. In the 20th century, we looked at public policy actions at the federal and state level, including the Federal Housing Administration, the Social Security Act, and the GI Bill. And then we turned our attention to mass incarceration and the war on drugs, the post-civil rights movement time in the 1970s up until today that have led to the United States leading the world in incarcerating its citizens. Then voter suppression, then and now, and finally, where do we go from here? Let's look for a minute at a few definitions. First, prejudice, which is an unfavorable opinion or feeling that is formed beforehand or without personal knowledge, thought, or reason. So absent personal experience, a prejudice is formed based on other information ahead of time. When we hear the word white supremacy, we think of white supremacists, the violent individuals who utilize all sorts of horrific actions and violence to suppress people of color. But white supremacy itself is the belief, theory, or doctrine that white people are inherently superior to people from all other racial groups, especially Black people, and are therefore rightfully the dominant group in any society. And clearly, this concept of white supremacy has played a significant role in the history of the United States and in our society today. Racism is that discrimination or action that is directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is minority or marginalized. And importantly, racism is a system of prejudice plus power. It becomes racism when there is the power to enact laws and actions that disadvantage a particular group. So people will frequently say, well, aren't Blacks racist? And while there can be prejudice and while there can be acts of individual discrimination, there is not the system of power that lets Black racism flourish. And so it's an important distinction. Today, we look at where do we go from here? What have we learned over these past 6 weeks? Knowing what we now know, how are we affected by this new knowledge? How are we different? What do we see differently than we did before? And as a consequence, what do we need to do individually and collectively? And given all this history that we have seen and all the impact and the implications for our country, do we sense a new urgency to act? We learned that the institution of slavery created and sustained an underclass of people that began well before the founding of the United States. And yet, as our country was founded and formed and developed, the institution of slavery necessitated a belief in Black inferiority. And that belief, in many regards, persists to this day. We learned about segregation that was law in the country until 1964 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And the legacy of that segregation still is significant in our country, in its laws and culture and policies. And that segregation perpetuated white supremacy because the segregation was predicated on the Plessy v. Ferguson decision, separate but equal. And of course, we know it was seldom equal. And when it was not equal, it was not that the circumstances and the laws that applied to Black people were more favorable than those that applied to whites. We looked at the intentional public policy in our laws and our culture in the areas of housing, education, benefits, jobs, the criminal justice system, and voting that in every instance systematically disadvantaged Black people. And so the roots of today's inequality are deeply embedded in our country. How does this history affect us? There is so much that we never knew, that we never understood. And we have to ask, why not? Why has this history not been taught? Why did we not know, so many of us? The legacy of segregation in all aspects of life, but especially in housing, led to our isolation from one another. And if we have very little personal knowledge, what fills the vacuum? stereotypes will flourish. Studies have shown that 75% of white Americans do not have a single Black friend, close friend, someone that they travel with, go to one another's houses for dinner, share personal experiences. And so without the personal knowledge, the stereotypes take hold. I took a class at DuPont back in the 70s called Developing Effective Black-White Relationships, and two African-American consultants from San Francisco taught the course. And as they began the course for us, they said, you cannot have grown up in the United States in the 20th century and not be prejudiced. It is not possible because we have been bombarded with messages and we have absorbed them. Some have been overt, some have been covert, but it is simply, it's like a fish swimming in water. The fish doesn't know what water is, it's just there. And that has led among white people specifically to levels of implicit bias. In the same class, they began by saying there were about 15 white managers and supervisors in the class and 2 Black DuPont employees from plant sites. And the purpose of the Black employees being there, the facilitators explained, was that as the facilitators described what racism looks like, what prejudice looks like, we white managers were likely to say, yeah, but not at DuPont. And so the Black employees were there as appropriate to say, oh, indeed. And in fact, during the course of the class, one of the men from a Southern plant related that the local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan held its monthly meetings in the conference room at the plant site at the invitation of the plant manager. But the consultant said to we white people, tell me what words come to mind when you think of Black people. And there was quite a silence for a while. And finally somebody said exotic. And somebody said athletic. And somebody said musical. And then there was a silence. And the facilitator said, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't ask what you thought. What I meant was, what have you heard? And we filled 11 chart pad pages with some of the most pejorative terms you could imagine. Criminal, murderer, welfare queen, 11 chart pads, and they hung them around the room. And I'm sitting there looking at these thinking, what must it be like to go out every day into your community and know that there are people who associate these words with me, whether they know me or not. Generally in the United States, if you are white, you are presumed competent until you prove that you're not. It doesn't take some people too long to do that. And if you are Black, there's a general presumption that you are not so competent and you need to demonstrate that you are. This shows up on studies they've done of job applications. The identical resume submitted for a particular job, one with a clearly white name and the other with a name that you would associate with an African American. The rate of callback, the rate of interview, the process of evaluation is markedly different simply based on your name. The other thing that happens when we are so isolated from one another is that there is a lack of understanding or empathy for what our life circumstances or situations might be like. What it is to be Black in America. And it is worthwhile to hold those conversations and to do the readings that help us understand. Relating these circumstances and stories can be very painful for those involved. And yet we white people need a deeper understanding of what it is like. A little bit later on, we'll talk about some opportunities there. But all of this requires that we take personal responsibility. And so much of what we're talking about this week is, what do we as white people need to do? We need to focus on self-examination. Particularly, we white people here need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's okay. In fact, it's necessary. It's part of the growth that needs to happen. Self-examination isn't easy because we tend to give ourselves a pass pretty much because we know what our intent is, but there is a difference between intent and impact. What we mean and what the consequence is of what we say or do in terms of our attitudes and our behaviors. And so we need additional education and dialogue, the opportunity to share thoughts, to ask questions, to expand our knowledge, to listen for understanding. And we need then to be moved to action. What is it that needs to be done? What can I do? What can I do? What are my options? What are my alternatives? Where can I make a difference? And then a personal commitment. What will I do as a consequence? So the self-examination includes observation. Observe ourselves in situations where race is a factor. What are we thinking? What are we feeling? What is happening? Trying to step outside of ourselves and look as objectively as we can. And then reflecting on those thoughts and feelings that we have. Monitoring our reactions. You know, as we have absorbed messages of all types, when an event occurs, we will react. And the feelings and the reactions often are without thought. They're just automatic. They just happen. But we need to look at those to be self-aware. Not sure if I've told you the story, but if I have, Bob will do this. It means this is the second time he's heard it. Often when I tell a story, he does this. But in any case, a tree fell on our house in October of 2019. We were in Washington, D.C. at the time, and we came home early to find significant damage to the roof in a section of the house. But more concerning was the location of the fallen 90-foot high pine tree and the damage that might ensue when the tree was removed. And so I, in particular, was very apprehensive as the crew arrived to take out the tree. And as I was sitting in the living room, I heard this horrific crash and boom and was so panicked at what might have happened. And I looked out the window and I saw that the crew chief was white, and I felt better. And I thought, all this work, all this awareness, all this knowledge, and yet my reaction is still, things will be better if the person in charge is white. So the issue was not so much having that reaction, although it was horrifying. It was, what do you do when you have a reaction like that? And can we talk ourselves through the really? Does that make any sense? And to consider the alternatives. And frequently, in order to do this self-examination, it's really helpful to engage a partner, someone who you trust, to give you honest feedback, to say, did you realize that this is what you said, or this is what you did, or this is how this felt? So these are things each of us particularly can take on as a responsibility. For all of us, there is more to learn. There are books to read, videos to watch, articles that have been published, museums to go to. If you have not attended the African American Museum in Washington, D.C., I strongly urge you to go. And it's not a one-day visit. It is a powerful representation of our country's history, the good and the bad. And the learnings are enormous from having the opportunity to be there. And there are classes and discussion groups like this one. Some recommended books. America's Original Sin by Jim Wallace begins with the institution of slavery. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a powerful writer, and Between the World and Me is a book, a little slip of a book, that is a letter that he wrote to his adolescent son about being a Black man in America. Carol Anderson is a professor at Emory University, and she has written two outstanding books, one called White Rage, which refers to the backlash that occurs within white America every time progress is made as a group by Black citizens. And then more recently, One Person, No Vote, that was written back in 2018, I believe, describing a lot of the voter suppression actions that were then taking place. The Equal Justice Initiative, which was founded by Brian Stevenson, has written a number of books, and they continue to put out more and more on different aspects of American history and African American history. These books were a source for a lot of the information contained in this class that we've been experiencing together these 6 weeks. The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander speaks to the mass incarceration issue in our country. Just Mercy is the book by Brian Stevenson relating his work with inmates on death row, many of which were incorrectly convicted and sentenced to death and have been released from prison as a consequence of his organization's work. The Warmth of Other Suns describes the Great Migration, and Caste describes the stratification in American society, both of these by Isabel Wilkerson. And most recently, a book by Heather McGhee called The Sum of Us, in which she emphasizes that the whole world need not be a zero-sum game, and that indeed there are actions that we can take as a country, as a society, that benefit all of us. So all of these come highly recommended, and I suspect you have a number on your list as well, and we can talk about those. Some excellent videos, one by PBS, Race, the Power of an Illusion, because there is no genetic basis for racial distinction. Robin DiAngelo does wonderful work on white privilege. And if you Google talks to help you understand racism in America, 25 TED Talks show up, each of which provides additional insight and learning. Emmanuel Acho was a former player with the Philadelphia Eagles. He's written a book, but the even more effective, I believe, is his video series called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man that you can Google and watch. 13th is the film that Ava DuVernay produced that is predicated on the consequences, the after effects of the 13th Amendment. Good Trouble, John Lewis. Just Mercy is the movie from Brian Stevenson's book. And this past week, Westminster Presbyterian Church, our Peace and Justice Work Group has a Thursday evening education event. And actually it was on March 18th, Alma Scott, a resident of a liberal white enclave in Wilmington known as the Highlands. She's an African-American woman. And she described her experience as a Black woman living in these communities over the past 42 years, and the microaggressions that she experiences each day. Again, there's intent and there's impact. I can send you the link for that. It is a powerful description of things that I imagine most of us white people would be oblivious to. The history of the idea of race is another excellent article, the Equal Justice Initiative books. And then in the April 2014 edition of The Atlantic, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a powerful article on the case for reparations for African Americans in the United States. There are opportunities for us for dialogue in discussion groups, in book groups, in establishing cross-racial relationships as we get to know one another on an individual basis. And it is important for us, particularly as white people, to listen for understanding and then to speak up where we see inequities. There are advocacy groups in every community that we can join that are working on issues of importance for equity, for equality, for policy changes. I heard a person say just last week, you know, protests are important, but the time is to move from protest to policy. And these advocacy groups seek changes in laws and other forms of norms and standards in our society. Joining those groups, working together with other people to make a difference is a huge both opportunity and responsibility for each of us. These are some Delaware advocacy groups. Wherever you live, there are certainly groups like this who are seeking to make meaningful change. Seek them out, find out who they are, find out what they're working on, find one that is focused on a passion of yours. Join in, work hard, advocate for change, make a difference. And seek opportunities to work together with people that we don't know. Make our voice heard on a personal level in organizational leadership. Call your state and local representative, call your federal representatives and senators. Make your voice heard. And then we can focus on personal reparations. If societal reparations on a broad brush will take a while, we have the opportunity, all of us, to patronize Black-owned businesses, to patronize those firms that focus on employing returning citizens. Returning citizens is a fairly new phrase in Delaware, and it's taken the place of ex-convict. The concept being that these are human beings. In fact, these are citizens of the United States. It's not that they've been released from prison, it is that they are returning to their families, to their communities. They are seeking jobs, they are seeking a return to a meaningful life in society. And there are companies like Horizon Services, like Second Chances Farm, a whole range of them that seek out and try to enable people returning from prison to be gainfully employed and to be able to live in a healthy way in their community. Contribute to and volunteer with Black-led organizations. There are so many, and so many are doing such incredible work. Find out who they are and join in. What got me off the couch began, I believe, in 2012 with the murder of Trayvon Martin. Tamir Rice was 12. Alton Sterling, Stephon Clark, Botham Jean, Laquan McDonald, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, Antoine Rose, Eric Garner, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, More recently, Casey Goodson, Andre Hill, and hundreds, if not thousands, more. So in closing, for my part of today, Eddie Glaude is the head of African American Studies at Princeton University. If you've not heard him speak, I encourage you to find videos of him. He is one of my favorite speakers. He is so on point and so insightful and so brutally honest. And he was talking about James Baldwin. Eddie Glaude has just written a book based on James Baldwin's work. And he said that Jimmy said that the question that he got from people, from white people, that he hated the most was, what does the Negro want? And James Baldwin would respond by saying, what do you want? You want fairness? You want justice? You want opportunity? You want safety? You want the opportunity to make a living, have a family? What you want? That's what the Negro wants. So we're asking today, for each of us, what is our conception of justice? Do we believe at any level that some people should be valued more than others because of the color of their skin? Black people are dying because of racism, because of police action, because of violence, because of health inequities, food deserts, poverty, poor nutrition, lack of access to health care, stress-related comorbidities, maternal and infant mortality, life expectancy. Is that justice? In October 2018, the Census Bureau created a comprehensive census tract level data set covering nearly the United States population. Life expectancy is a fundamental indicator of inequality. Researchers focus on life expectancy as the broadest possible dimension of privilege. The life expectancy for children born in Centerville, Delaware, exceeds those born in Wilmington near East 12th Street by 18 years, almost 2 decades. These census tracts are less than 6 miles apart. And in addition to all these deaths and all this loss and all this tragedy, our country is at risk because of the actions that we are willing to take or to allow that are predicated on racism. One need only look at Georgia in the last couple days, but it's the tip of the iceberg. And so it is up to us in partnership with one another to fight for justice.
Thank you, Sue. We are now open for comments or questions or individual action plans that you may have been involved in already and would like to hear from you.
Bob and Sue, it's Bob Storley. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
This is only the second session that I've been able to attend in person, but I'm almost caught up with everything except for number 5. And I'm a good friend of Dave Cron's and a college classmate. We both live in the Twin Cities now, and Dave made me aware of what's going on here the last 6 weeks, for which I'm very grateful. And I just want to say thanks a lot to both of you, particularly Sue, for getting into the weeds and bringing up stuff that I thought I was relatively aware of the history of slavery and racism in this country, but I had no idea about some of the stuff that's been going on, and I'm eternally grateful for that opportunity. And I may weigh in on other things before we're done here, but I just wanted to say that to start with.
Thank you for being here, Bob.
Thank you again.
Martin and Michelle have the muting turned off. Did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah. I actually have a lot, so.
Okay, start with a couple.
The main thing I want to emphasize is, we see all these dire statistics on African Americans and how racism impacts African Americans. And I know that you've already discussed Heather McGee's book, which explicitly lists the cost to all of us. And I think that's an important thing for people to understand, that this isn't just costing Black people. And so the same mechanisms that harm Black people harm poor white people. And so you have to understand that. And one of the things that drove a lot of reactions from the FBI on Martin Luther King and on the Black Panther Party is when they started talking about, look, we're not alone. And in Chicago, there was, I can't recall the Black Panther Party member's name, but he actually had white racist groups listening to him and saying, yeah, wait a second, this is right. And so then he was, of course, assassinated in a FBI raid, but we won't get into that, that some people may not like the controversy of that. But the whole thing is Citigroup calculated that the US economy lost $16 trillion. Did you hear that? $16 trillion because of racism. And so people have to understand that yes, Black people get treated this way. And, I know that I come from, I'm really not a leftist in the sense of being a leftist, because I'm a marketing professor, for crying out loud. I believe in the free enterprise system. But the thing about it is we just have to understand that some people are benefiting from this. And when we have this turmoil among ourselves, constantly fighting each other, someone can get a bigger piece of the pie. And so that's what this is all about, and educating people to understand that, we're fighting over little small issues while someone else is taking a bigger piece of the pie. And so, and understand that, okay, one of the things, I'm not going to get too deep on this, but one of the things is, like, for instance, everyone thinks, oh, we have some of the lowest taxes in the developed nations. And so therefore we take home more money than everyone else. Well, no, we're like 20th on the list when you include healthcare costs. Okay. We're not anywhere near being, the first in talking about money that's actually in our pockets. So why don't we have a better healthcare system? Well, we get fighting about all these issues, and then we miss the point that someone else is getting rich off of us fighting on this. And so we look at, you mentioned the dire survival rates, life expectancies. Well, there have been books written. We can talk about Poor White Trash, which was a book that was written by Eisenberg. And we can talk about all the recent studies that talk about poor whites are now having the same life expectancies as African Americans. Okay. And so understand this is not just hurting Black people. And I think we have to really educate people on, this is more than just racism. And the whole point in doing this racism, I'm gonna leave with this quote, this is by Lyndon Baines Johnson. I don't know if anyone's heard this one, but if you convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pockets. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you.
Thank you, Martin. It's absolutely right. And the Reverend William Barber is currently the head of the Poor People's Campaign, which is focused on ensuring that we are paying attention more broadly to the damage being done to poor people across society. And he's an enormous Black man who goes into Appalachia and has hugely meaningful conversations with poor white people in Appalachia with an appreciation and an understanding for what happens. I do recommend Heather McGee's book. She starts out by a focus on the decisions that were made, I guess, in the 60s or 70s to integrate public pools. At the time,
right,
most cities had public swimming pools because A, there was no air conditioning, and B, there were no backyard pools. So the way that people cooled off in the summer was to go to the municipal pools, and it was wonderful, but they were segregated. And when sufficient laws and actions passed that said that now African Americans needed to be allowed to swim in the pools, many of them were drained, filled with concrete, parks closed, so nobody got to swim in a pool because of the strength of the desire to keep Black people from swimming in the pool. And I'm reminded of a cartoon I saw this week, Martin. It's a line drawing of three people. There's a man at the head of the table, and he has a plate piled high with cookies. And to his right is a representation of a poor white man with one cookie. And then on the other side is a person of color, could be Latino, could be Black. And the man at the head of the table says to the white man, he's trying to take your cookie.
Yes. Yes.
It's a powerful representation of exactly what you're talking about. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I didn't want to down everyone.
Anyone else want to share
out there?
some things that you are doing yourself or involved in, or ideas you have, or just basic opinions?
Yes, right now, my biggest involvement when we talk about this particular issue is I'm on the Diversity Commission over at the Cesar Rodney School District. And so this particular committee, excuse me, I said commission, but committee, what we're looking at is equity in education, and that includes outcomes, the fact that we have a less than diverse teaching professional teachers in front of the classroom. And why is that? It's not representative in any fashion. We also see just the same type of disparities when we talk about African-American students receiving more severe discipline, etc. Okay, so I've been involved with that. I'm always volunteering on some type of get out the vote campaign or something like that. So those are the big issues that I'm involved with right now. I've had other things that I've been involved with, you know, and most of them have been things like trying to recruit more African Americans into careers and educational opportunities. And so I look at those things. And a few years back, I wrote a book. It was When Did We All Become Middle Class? It actually talks about how we're not all middle class, but that was the name of it. So you know, various things that I do. I don't
Thank you.
know if that makes any difference.
Sure.
Of course,
Thank
of course. There's a lot of pending legislation in Delaware. I know everybody on this call is not from Delaware, but I suspect the same may be happening in your area. Some of which making your voice heard in support would be very important. Some making your voice heard in opposition, Hilton Head resident, would be very important in the context of making sure that these bills just don't go sailing through the legislature with the old historic viewpoints and considerations being applied. So knowing what they are.
Barbara and Robert have had their hands up for a while.
Oh, sorry. I can't see them.
Robert was first, so let him go first.
Oh, Robert, yeah, Bob, George. You have to unmute.
There we go.
There
Okay.
you go.
There's a saying in the South, everybody needs their Mississippi, which means you have to have somebody to look down to, you know, like, well, we're better than Mississippi, you know, so it's it has that. And I think there's part of it. But one thing that I've come to grips with this week is I've always known that from working in the South and plants with a large Black team that was, well, you know, relatively large Black team, that it was, there was a probability of being invisible. People just didn't pay attention to you. They didn't do that. And I remember when Carol talked to me about being in a meeting at DuPont, and where she or one of the girls in the, you know, one of the women in the meeting would come up with an idea, and 20 minutes later, a guy would come up with the same idea, some old white guy, and they go, "Oh, that's a good idea. Why don't we try that?" And I bet you a month's salary that Sue got a chance to see that happen over that. And so, you know, that kind of invisibleness is very, it's destructive. And what I realized this past week is that there's a whole group of people that we have prejudice against because we think they're smarter and better educated and play more, you know, better instruments than we do. And it's Asians. And all of a sudden, you know, they're getting beat up and it's really sad. And we really don't pay attention to that kind of prejudice in our community, but it's there. And I remember at DuPont, there was one of the things, working with one of the senior managers who was Asian. And I realized of all the talents that Asians have, why don't we have more senior VPs at DuPont that are Asian, that are leading? I mean, what's going on? And it just was not it's got to be the same kind of institutional prejudice that keeps people that are really well suited for that. And I think we need, you know, I don't want to take anything away from the issue of Blacks and whites and what's going on, and George Floyd and Trayvon Martin, but it really is sad. And I think we need to be more inclusive in our understanding that, you know, this whole, you know, we feel sorry. I saw today that half of all of the white men who voted for Trump refused to get the vaccine. And I'm going, well, you know, that might improve things in their own way, kind of thing. But it is a, you know, that's maybe a prejudice that I have. But you know, if they aren't getting the vaccine, there's really consequences of that, and that kind of thing is sad, and we need to kind of break that down so that we don't have the situation that people wearing masks are obviously Democrats. So anyhow, that's what the thing I just wanted to bring up was that we haven't brought up the issue of caste within the kind of the Asian issue, but I think it probably is something that is worth us trying to understand, just like we understand some of the things that we're focused on here.
Indeed, and I think to the extent to which we can begin to deal with this whole issue of stereotypes and preconceived ideas of who people are and who they can be based on, you know, it's kind of white and non-white, and then it's just category of non-white, you know, in that regard. So understanding the origins and the depths gives us, I think, the wherewithal then to broaden our view and say, how does this make any sense? I mean, what is it that we have to learn? What is it that we have to know to appreciate the fact that we are all human beings, every single one of us? I'm going to recommend, I'm going to send you, have Bob send you a link to the Unpacking Racial Microaggressions class that took place on the 18th of March, because I think it will give all of us some insight into a number of the things that we've been talking about right here, right now. I think you'll find it powerful and informative.
Yes, what I was thinking about was that even before this particular class, just reflecting on the previous ones, that when people, you know, try to say that there's no systemic racism, that it's, you know, it's just, you know, a cultural thing or whatever. But clearly, when you look at the history that you have presented, it's very systemic, and it started a long time ago and it continues. And I was reminded of that again, maybe even last night, when I saw the voting law that was signed in Georgia by Brian Kemp, and all white men, not a single person of color, not even a single woman. You know, he had this private signing ceremony of white men. And what did they do? They arrested this Black woman who is a legislator in the state of Georgia because she wanted to attend the ceremony, or at least slightly protest it. And, you know, and so she gets arrested. You know, there is just such a long way to go in this country to get rid of the systemic part of this racism. And I think it does help for us to, you know, look at ourselves and try to figure out how we can maybe change some of the attitudes that we've grown up with. But also, I do feel like it's important to start getting more involved. I put a couple of toes in the water this last year when I did get involved with trying to get out the vote in Georgia, and you know, sending the postcards that Sue had offered the opportunity to do, and you know, having my birthday fundraiser for the Equal Justice Initiative. But I really do think that there's more things like I want to look into some of these various organizations, advocacy groups that are local, to see how I can get more involved and understand more specifically about our own legislation in Delaware, because there's also has been an advertising campaign indicating that in our Court of Chancery, we don't have any Black judges. And so, you know, it's pretty crazy at this point in time. They're advocating that maybe it's time that we have one Black judge in the Court of Chancery, which is a very important court in this state. And so, I don't know, there's a lot to be done, for sure.
There is. Barbara, I know you had your hand up for quite a while. Let me just make one quick point. Ibram X. Kendi wrote a book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And his point is you can be racist, non-racist, and anti-racist.
Mhm.
Racists were clear. We know who those wild and crazy people are. Non-racists, as most of us white people, we live in a system that benefits white people. And either we're not terribly conscious of it or we're okay with it, or we know it's really not right, but you know, stuff's going on. And then anti-racists are people who actively work to change the policies and the laws and the systems, whether they discriminate against Asians or Latinos or Blacks or poor people or whatever. So becoming an anti-racist, an active person, is what's called for. Barbara.
Yeah, first let me thank you and Bob for putting on this tremendous course. I've participated in a number of similar things, but you've just done a spectacular job in organizing it and presenting it in a very clear way. So thank you for both of you giving up your time. I hear you've done this multiple times, so the fact you would make such a commitment is very impressive, I think. I just wanted to raise something. I have been very, very upset about the voter suppression laws, excuse me, that are being introduced around the country. And if they're successful and don't go unchallenged, and I'm not at all comfortable the tort's going to do anything about overturning them. And I'm really concerned that we're going to have leaders that are more in the racist category than even in the other categories. And I'm wondering, in the past, I know of the strength of economic power, and I remember, and I can't remember now which state it was in, but there were some states that were going to be passing anti-gay, lesbian legislation, and the sports decided they were not going to hold their conferences or any big games in those states. And I haven't heard anything in the national press, but I was wondering what your reaction would be if we called upon the corporate world and the sports world to say, we're not going to hold big national events in states that pass these voter suppression laws.
I think I read something about Major League Baseball not holding.
It's basketball.
Was it basketball?
Yeah, they weren't going to hold the championships in Atlanta.
In Atlanta.
And and basically the labor union of the basketball players were getting together to talk about that.
So it's also Major League Baseball. They were supposed to hold the All-Star game in Atlanta this year.
Oh.
I think that's what I just heard about, that Major League Baseball was looking at not having the All-Star game there. Of course, there are 43 states passing these laws.
Mhm.
Pretty soon, you know, you're going to have to come to Hawaii for, well, that's not.
Yeah.
There are 100 laws being passed.
There
Oh,
are
there's
200.
there's more than that.
As
Yeah, there's way
of
more than
3
that.
days ago, there were 253.
Right.
As of yesterday, there were 258. I suspect the number will be bigger by Monday, and that's in 43 states.
Yeah.
43 states.
Well, to Barbara's point, economic pressure works. It was North Carolina that passed that horrible bathroom bill several years ago, where you had to use the bathroom that was assigned to your birth certificate gender. And the pressure that they got back from organizations that were supposed to be hosting events in Charlotte and other large North Carolina cities caused them to reverse that law. So it works. And that's something we can all do.
Anyone else have their hand raised?
Rebecca?
One thing, I live in just outside of Chicago, and in the neighborhood of Evanston, which is half an hour from me, they have just passed a reparations bill, which they're the first in the nation to do that. It's quite controversial, and it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. But I think that it's $25,000 for someone can apply for this $25,000. It has to be used toward their home. They have to be able to prove that there was some discrimination in the past in the housing market. But it's interesting to see whether other neighborhoods will follow suit with that.
That was a hopeful announcement, certainly. And again, I'll mention the Ta-Nehisi Coates article, A Case for Reparations in the Atlantic. It's a broad view of reparations, and I think it provides a really meaningful perspective for dialogue on this subject. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Another interesting project that maybe you enjoy reading about was in Chicago, where a young woman lived on this street in Chicago, and she was Black, and she was bused to another neighborhood that was about a half a mile away, all on the same street. And as a young girl on the bus, she would notice that when she got on the bus, the closer she got to her school, the nicer the housing became. And so she ended up, she's now an adult, and she's a photographer, and she's started what's called the Folded Map Project. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but she just took a map and folded it, following her street. And she has gotten the people together from her neighborhood and from this other neighborhood, which is predominantly white. And they've been getting together in this Folded Map Project. They started out, one of the things she started out with was looking at the costs of their homes. And in her neighborhood, I forget the exact figures, but let's just say the value in her homes was $20,000. The value just on this same street in the white neighborhood was $100,000. I'm not sure those are exact figures, but just to give you an idea. So it's been quite a successful project. She gets these people together from the two neighborhoods, and it's really interesting to read about. So might want to check it out.
Thank you. Thank you. I think Michelle had her hand up. I know Madeline has had her hand. I don't see Michelle's hand right now. Madeline's is up and Doyle's is up. Michelle,
Michelle is up.
Michelle's up. I try not to be so divergent, but when I first told my son, I said that we were taking this class, and I said, "You learned about this in school, didn't you?" He said, "No, I didn't." But anyway, I remember, I'm not an involved person, but when the kids were smaller, like in grade school, Black History Month, I always tried to do something, And but as they grew older, I guess in high school and like junior high school and high school, it's just I sort of missed the point that they were not getting this in school. I don't know where it was or whatever, but I know now, 25 years later, they didn't get it. But this is another tangent. We hosted an exchange student from Taiwan. My daughter went to Taiwan, and then we had a Taiwanese student come to visit. And the question was, why do we have Martin Luther King's Day as a holiday? I said, haven't you heard of Martin Luther King? He said, no. I said, he won a Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, the thing is, he knew about Hitler, he didn't know about Martin Luther King. So I educated him about Martin Luther King. He educated me about Huckanese. He was Hucker first, Chinese second, Taiwanese third, that whole thing. So there was a dialogue back and forth. So there's a lot that, I guess, around the world that we're not educated about. I don't know if this should be mandatory in school. It's hard to make people do things. And then I sort of go on a tangent. 4th of July, when I go to work, I don't know why I do that because I work in retail pharmacy. So 4th of July, happy Cesar Rodney Day. People think I'm insane. I mean, if it wasn't for Cesar Rodney, we wouldn't have this holiday, people. Isn't that important to you? I run across people, it doesn't matter. I mean, this is just part of the history of the state of this country, and no one's excited about it. I guess I sort of get over zesty over it. But so do you force people? I mean, you're living in the Cesar Rodney School District, for heaven's sakes. Doesn't it matter? Does CR mean anything to you? It doesn't. So I'm just trying to figure out, how are you going to educate people in school? This is history. You don't care about this. You don't want to hear about this. You want to do that. We make you learn this. We give you a test on it. Does it matter? And Then my son said, I didn't get this in school. I was still sort of disturbed by that. But I've learned new things by taking this course. I tell you, new things. Thought I knew a lot, but I did learn more. So I really appreciate that. And I just wanted to go off on my tangent. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you.
Now.
Thanks. Madeline?
I want to thank Michelle for her tangents. I love them. Agree with him completely. And I wanted also to thank you for this discussion and for bringing Alma Scott's Microaggressions to my attention. I found that hour or so enlightening, so helpful, that on a personal basis, I think it's something I should check in with quarterly to see how am I doing. Even if you are aware of them, you forget. And if people are doing them in my presence, I want to learn how to call those out in an effective way. And here's my separate thanks to you for this course. I was able to get the information into my head that was missed in my school, so that I no longer can hear people talk about the systemic issues and not know how true they are. And that's going to change my body language, just that knowledge. So I'm so grateful to you. Thank you very much for helping us put the dots together. I hope that that can just continue. There is an organized, low-key way that gets into my brain. It's not the way that we get into many other people's brains, but for me, a personal big thanks to you. And thank you for the Alma Scott connection. As for which advocacy groups to join and when to stand up and vote or hold the sign or write the letter, I'm going to have to rely on people I know to follow. So if I were made aware that Martin and Michelle thought this was an important moment to act, or that you, Sue, thought this was important, or that this was an initiative Alma Scott was trying to get done in Delaware, boy, I'd be in line to raise my hand, send the postcards, do that kind of voice that tells people there are a lot of people paying attention. There are eyes watching this situation. So I hope also that those kinds of connections can continue to grow in an easy way. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. Bob, are you calling on people? I think I usurped your. Bob,
You're doing a fine job, as you always do.
Are you here? I don't even see you.
Anybody else like to share?
Yes.
Doyle's had his hand up for a while.
Barbara, I didn't hear what you said.
I said Doyle's
Doyle.
had his hand up for a while.
Doyle, okay.
Oops, you're muted, Doyle. I'm going to get a mug. It says you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I guess I have a couple of thoughts I wanted to throw out. One is, I look at the group, and except for one or two people, we're a bunch of old folks. And in recent years, I've gotten very involved in ancestry stuff, and consequently, I've become kind of the family historian, and it's a broad family. It's like over 200 people that are connected in some way. And I've started asking people, well, what do you want to do before you become an ancestor? And it's a kind of a unique little way to get people's attention. You know, not what do I want to do before I die? What do you want to do before you become an ancestor? And so I would suggest that. We're in the midst of starting a family, broad family, the Dobbins clan discussion on racism. And one of the reason that we're able to do that, I think, is because in the last couple of decades, we've become more of a diverse family. So we have people within the family who have very different perspectives and opinions and so forth. And I can say all the way from agnostics to Christian nationalists. And that's a lot of diversity. But we're trying to approach it in such a way that people can express their opinion, can share their experiences. And one thing that we're finding already is that young and old seem to experience racism very differently. And when people start to share their personal experiences about becoming aware of racism, it seems to catch on and get people's attention. So I wanted to suggest that as a way for people to get more involved if they choose to. Just find out what other people have experienced and share your own experiences.
I think dialogue is just so important in so many
Yes.
ways. And sometimes it's speaking up when someone makes a difficult
Oh, and
comment.
I wanted to share one last thing, and that is, I've been a beekeeper for over 30 years, and I can talk to Christian nationalists, Trumpists, or agnostics, or atheists, or anyone in between about beekeeping, and it's amazing how interested most people are about beekeeping. And so you get to talking, and my point is, you can talk about a lot of other things before you get into racism. And it's you got to have something to get the conversation going. So whether it's beekeeping or something else, I think it's a good idea. So I just throw that out. Thank you very much. And thank you for all that you've presented. Very helpful.
Sue and Bob, thank you so much. What a wonderful program.
Thanks
Very
for being
important.
here. Thanks
Very
for being
important.
here. Beverly?
Hi, I wanted to say that I thought Martin's point about enlightened self-interest was very important, because, when you attack people, you don't get that far. But if you can approach people from the point of view, this is how this is going to benefit you, I think that kind of leads more way to an opening. And just on a personal level, I've been involved in a local little program called Study Buddies for a couple of years, in which they meet at the basement of a local church, and kids who don't have a lot of help at home come in, and we help them with their homework and everything. And so I'm trying to just educate myself on a personal level and broaden my experience with people. And we also have a program in Kennett called Bridging the Community, in which we get together and people come with needs, and other people come with something that they want to volunteer. And then we bridge and we get together and work together as a community. And I think there are such important ways. People have to get to know one another. People have to mix. And when you get to know, it's just like people who are gay. I mean, if you don't know somebody who's gay, you might say, oh, my heavens, that's terrible. But then when you get to know somebody who is gay or trans or something, you think, oh, they're just like us. And I think it's the same way between races. All people are basically the same. They want all the same things. So if you mingle and you get to know each other, you don't have this fear and divide. And anyway, thank you very much for the program. It's been very helpful.
Thank you. And Beverly, that's why in the context of sort of all this history, that segregation that persisted for all those years, that prevented us from getting to know one another as people, has contributed as much of the problem as anything else. Because once we do know one another as individuals, as fellow mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, grandmothers, grandfathers,
Mm.
beekeepers. It changes. It changes us and it changes our connections. And so finding those now is really important.
Mhm.
Mike?
I'd like to thank you so much for offering this course to the University of Michigan Club of Delaware. And then it was neat to see it expand. And I was actually tickled to see how many people are from the Unitarian Church and who joined in. And sort of give a shout out too that a member of that church, Reverend Paula Majorano, has done a lot of work with people who have been released from prison and offering ministry to them and trying to help them along. So thank you so much for what you've done here.
Thank you. And that all of those reentry programs are in great need of mostly people resources to help returning citizens get reestablished in a way. I also wanted to give you an update because I did tell you, I believe 2 weeks ago at the mass incarceration class, we talked about the recidivism rate in Delaware, that 75% of people released from jail are reincarcerated within 3 years. The majority of those reincarcerations occur because of a parole or probation violation. And it doesn't even have to be adjudicated. The first action when the violation is discovered is the person is reincarcerated. And then there's a judgment made as to whether or not that reincarceration is appropriate. So there are changes that can be made, pretty simple, straightforward changes that can be made that would dramatically improve people's lives. So this whole returning citizen question is amenable to a great deal of personal involvement to transform people's lives. Junius?
I can let James go first. He had his hand raised before me.
Oh, sorry, didn't see that.
Me go? Okay. I just want to thank you so much for putting on this course, and it's really appreciated. And I mean, I'm from Dover, so I'm wondering. I remember, I think the first class you mentioned how you tried to get this course in the Red Clay School District, I believe, if I have that correctly. So I know some people at Delaware State University, so maybe I can contact some people there and we can get this going.
That would be fabulous. That would be fabulous.
So,
that would be great, Junius. Thank you.
I just want to, commend you on this course. I wish more young people had exposure to a course like this. Being in college, I definitely see there's a lot of lack of knowledge of the history overall. So thank you again.
Okay.
Junius, you may know that Martin is associated with Delaware State also.
Okay. Oh yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. And thank you for being here, Junius, and go blue.
Go blue.
Yes, I can say that to many of you. Jim?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to thank you, Sue and Bob. Thank you so much. It's been a great 6 weeks. I really have two comments. One is, may seem tangential, but it's very apropos. The Chinese, by the end of by 2100, in literally 80 years, the Chinese population is going to go down on its current trajectory from 1.2 billion to about 700 million. Like literally 500 million less people 80 years out. And the point I'm trying to make is that some societies are closed. The Japanese society is relatively closed. They don't promote immigration, okay? One of the best strengths the United States has is we just have, while we have a lot of bad history, terrible history, we also have a history of welcoming immigrants, right? And while it's a very altruistic thing to do, I want to get back to Martin's point on the economic self-interest. One of the biggest problems I see is this issue of economic zero-sum game, right? So this perception that the pie is a fixed pie, and if some other part of our society or some other group in the US society wins, it has to be a loss for me, right? There's no no other way around it. And the reality is that is just simply false. If you look at economic growth in this country over 100 or 200 years, we've grown tremendously. The pie has grown through each generation, up and down for sure. But if you were to look at it over a long period of time, the economic pie in this country has grown. So the perception that I must lose if someone else wins is really holding us back.
Yep.
And the other thing I'd say, tying it back to the immigration piece, is I actually am very optimistic about the United States, because at the end of the day, we welcome immigrants. We're not very good at it sometimes. We're not very gracious about it. But at the end of the day, the people that are coming in are people that will be workers in the society and contribute to this society that will allow us to grow, so the pie will not be fixed. And I just see that as one of the biggest challenges we have going forward, is to have people understand that it is not a zero-sum game. It's never been that way in the United States. There's no reason to believe it will be that way in the future, although there are Asian societies and there are other societies in the world that frankly are not open to immigration. They're not open to diversity, okay, so to speak. And that's a challenge. That's going to be a challenge for them. That's going to be an existential challenge for a couple of societies around the world as we look out over the next 40, 50, 60, 80 years. So again, I'm an optimist about the US. We're not always elegant how we get there, but we get there.
Well, thank you for that, Jim. And I certainly agree. And it really is one more recommendation. Martin mentioned the book. I've mentioned the book, The Sum of Us, by Heather McGee. And it is all predicated on the fact that we are not talking about a zero-sum game. And she has tangible example after example after example that speaks to actions that are good for all of us, and as opposed to those actions that appear to disadvantage one group, but that actually disadvantage a much broader population. So I commend that to all of us. I'm only a third of the way through. Still have a lot more to learn, but it's a great book in that regard and makes exactly your point, Jim. Thank you.
Anyone else? You folks just don't want this to end, I can tell.
Bob, I just had a question for Bob. Would it be possible for you to email out to us the slide that listed the books and the videos? I tried to write some of them down, but I lost the slide before I got them all.
What I will do is to send out the recording of this whole session. And when you get to that particular slide,
Okay.
You can stop it, or I can send you the picture. I can see Sue has another approach.
I can send you the links via an email. That's no problem.
Just those two
Okay.
slides you had.
Yep, sure.
Well, I'm still sending out the recording.
That's fine.
But you don't have to wade your way through the whole recording. Yeah, we'll send you those slides. That'd be great.
You'll send it to all of us, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I think we've come down to the end, and I want to thank all of you for participating, not only today, but over the last 5 Saturdays. As Mike said, the University of Michigan Alumni Club of Delaware has been proud to offer these presentations on what is clearly a very important and a relevant topic. Yet the real value doesn't come just from listening. It comes from what each of us does now to take all that we have heard and all that we have learned and apply this knowledge to promote more racial justice within the context of our individual lives. So thank you again. Take care and go blue.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Aloha.
Thank you again, Lindermans. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Indeed, thank you.